You're listening to the Valley Current.
So, Steve, welcome into the Valley Current. We're talking about what people do right and people do wrong in connection with Roth IRA investing. And as I said a moment ago, I did a little search using the new tool that has made a lot of news called ChatGPT. It's an AI tool that allows you to type in a few words, sometimes a question, and it comes back with a lot of information. So I sent you the information that it provided me about traditional IRAs, SEP IRAs, and Roth IRAs. You got that printed out. That was all generated by this tool that Microsoft has invested, I don't know, at least $1 billion in. And I think they want to integrate it with Bing as a way to challenge Google. But it's interesting how much information can be readily generated. Now, a lot of it is pretty standard information, but I was curious, do you think it's accurate, the data that it provided about traditional IRAs versus SEP IRAs versus Roth IRAs and the pros and cons of a Roth conversion? Because I typed all four of those questions in one by one, and it came back with several paragraphs of text that I thought I should send to you because you're the resident CPA tax expert, to get your views about whether it basically got the descriptions of each of those more or less correct.
I think the first part of what you sent me seemed close. I was disappointed that it did not source the information or attribute the information. Right. So if I wanted to complain about the information, to correct the information, or to sue somebody about the information, who would I sue?
I think they want to avoid attribution because they don't want copyright problems. Their theory is that they're scraping the web for as much public domain information. Now, most of the information on the web is not public domain. It's copyright protected, but effectively a permission is granted for those to view it. Whether that permission extends to a tool like ChatGPT is a different question that now there may be some litigation about. But generally speaking, the tool has a lot of value because instead of just getting a Google search with a lot of information back in various linked form where the attribution is clear, as you say, because Google effectively takes you to the source, this compiles the information into text as though the chat system is itself the author. But the chat system is not really the author. The chat system is more or less cutting and pasting from what it thinks are reliable sources without attribution. So you don't really know where it came from. Now, the flip side is down the road, I could see that various publishing companies like Westlaw, Lexis, Reuters, and others will want to train a tool like ChatGPT against their content, which is reliable, so that they have a much easier way for their customers to use this sort of tool with specific target database information. That's so far, folks haven't done that, but it's sort of like a new front end to where you start your search. The reason I thought it would be helpful is because if you imagine the layperson that knows nothing about a Roth IRA, a SEP IRA, or a traditional IRA, this might be the fastest way to get information about what are the similarities and differences of these three different investment vehicles, right?
Well, yes, but if the chat system and or Microsoft is itself the author, does that mean I can sue Microsoft?
Well, there actually is a case, I think, that's now been brought against Microsoft on the theory that they are behind this tool. The tool is actually is being published by a separate company. The separate company's name, I think, is OpenAI, and Microsoft has made a very large investment in OpenAI. And so you're right to sort of raise the question of where is this coming from and who's responsible for it. Ultimately, I think the answer is going to be this separate company called OpenAI. I'm going to see if I could find the actual tool, because we're sort of starting with this question of, well, what are these basic investment vehicles? And then we're going to get to what happens when someone gives some advice that doesn't really look at all the pros and cons from both a tax and legal point of view of what the advice is that they're giving as the wealth manager. Because you had a good example of a case, we won't name any names or point to any fingers, but you kind of had an actual case referral, potentially for a case from an individual that fundamentally you could argue has been taken advantage of, but we'll leave that to one side for a second. So just tell us a little bit about what are the very various definitions of what these investment vehicles are, because a lot of people don't even know they exist, right?
Sure, and we'll get to that. But first, when I put out tax advice, I do put my name on it, but I also include some disclaimers that I don't see here on the open GP chat.
Right.
And those disclaimers are worth mentioning. They're on my website and every email I send. But basically, tax is changing constantly. And you should not rely on anything you hear for trades or for decision making, because it's not necessarily the latest. It's not necessarily based on your specific facts and circumstances.
Right.
And so nothing herein should be relied on for any financial decisions. Right. And that said, I think that the pros and cons put out by this ChatGPT are incorrect and are bad advice.
Okay.
And I'll start with the bottom, which is that you should, says it is always a good idea to consult with a financial advisor or a tax professional to make tax decisions. Well, financial advisors are not necessarily tax experts.
Right.
And their motivations do not necessarily have your best interests at heart. They probably get paid commissions or other incentives based upon some third party's desire to get you to buy something.
Right.
And so there's an inherent conflict of interest there as well. Many of the financial advisors I've encountered are not on top of this particular issue, the pros and cons of a Roth IRA. And the pros and cons that have been reprinted here are garbage.
Okay, so let's go through just basics of what is a traditional IRA, what is a SEP IRA, and then what is a Roth IRA, because lots of people don't even know that they can sock some money away, perhaps, if they qualify for these plans. These are forms of pension plans, right, in the United States?
They are, and there's really two categories, Roth and traditional. And that third category quote that you mentioned, the SEP IRA, it's a type of traditional IRA, so it doesn't belong in the categories. It belongs in the subsets of traditional IRA. And there's many, many different types of retirement vehicles, but basically they fall into two categories, either Roth or not Roth.
Right.
And so and I'm possibly oversimplifying here and not giving you every single nuance or rule, but the basic difference is that with a traditional IRA, the money is pre-tax, so you have not yet paid tax on it, and you may pay tax on it at some point in the indefinite future,
right?
Perhaps after you retire and make a distribution. Then again, you might possibly never pay taxes on it. Many things could happen. On the other hand, with a Roth IRA, you pay taxes now upfront. And then the money in the Roth IRA is essentially an after-tax vehicle where the taxes have already been paid. And therefore, you would not be paying taxes. You would probably not be paying any further taxes in the future, in the distant future, when at some point you distribute the money.
Now, how early in life could someone choose to put earnings into either a traditional or into a Roth IRA? Like, how early could that happen?
One should almost never put money into a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs should be used with extreme caution.
Why is that?
You technically can put money into either vehicle as soon as you have earned income, such as wages. And presumably that might be around the age of 18 or thereabouts.
Well, you have these child actors in Hollywood that earn money, maybe even at 6 months old if they're in a film, right? In theory.
This is very true. And in fact, that's one of the very few situations where a Roth might be desirable. And if the parent is savvy, or the guardian, the fiduciary responsible party is savvy, they might consider that the child has a very low tax rate. And so now is a good time to pay taxes because the taxes are very low, possibly zero.
Right, because if the child earns under 6,000 in a given year, there's no reporting requirement and no tax requirement.
Approximately, yes.
Too low?
Yes, and even there, if the child makes a little bit more money, the tax rate might be as low as 10%. Perhaps even less, slightly less.
Right. So in theory, just purely in theory, and I'm not saying this is correct advice or people should do it, a business owner that uses photographs or videos or something of their child and treats that as a compensable form of giving by the child, the way Hollywood actors and actresses are paid, in theory, some money could be paid. And I think there are some extremely savvy business people that own things like podcasts and video YouTube channels that do that with their kids, bring their kids onto the show. And you wonder, why are the kids on the show? And I think they're doing some form of payment out of the business to the child, and then the money is making its way into a Roth IRA with really a long-term appreciation hoped for, which might be as many as 20 to who knows how many years, right?
Indeed.
Appreciates over time. So in theory, if it's 6,000 a year as the maximum that could go in, or is it 7,000? It's something like that, isn't it?
Approximately.
So imagine that that's invested in a stock like Tesla or some stock, hopefully, that appreciates over time significantly, or even an index. And if there's that appreciation over time, there can be substantial wealth produced on a tax-free basis in that Roth IRA, right?
Indeed.
And that Roth IRA could result in that child having maybe a substantial amount for a down payment, which can come out tax-free, or a substantial amount for college in lieu of a 529 plan or in addition to a 529 plan. So there's a lot of potential there for what you might call the low tax rate individual to sock money into a Roth IRA, right? The good news there is that basically it appreciates over time tax-free, but that's true also for traditional IRA, but it can come out tax-free at the end of the cycle. The Roth can come out tax-free at the end of whatever the end is in the process when the money is taken out. In a traditional IRA, it appreciates tax-free. It's deductible at the front end, but at the back end, there are taxes that have to be paid as you withdraw the money, right? At ordinary income tax rates, right?
Yes, the government wants its money eventually and has rules such as minimum required distributions to force the money to eventually be withdrawn once you reach the age 70 and a half. Now, you can still do things like qualified charitable donations. And those qualified charitable donations take the pre-tax money and give it directly to the charity, and nobody pays taxes. So that's a very good thing for somebody over 70 and one half to start looking at. Is
Right.
Rather than pay charitable donations using a checkbook or using cash, you would want to make the charitable donations directly from
Right.
the IRA vehicle. The trouble is, when somebody is over 70, their hearing might not be great, and explaining this to them may take many repetitions.
Right. Someone that's over retirement age, let's call it 65, although I think it's changing in America. It used to be 65. There were some people that used to think it should get lower, like 62. I guess technically you can take Social Security at the age of 62. But most people these days, I think, are working longer and maybe aren't retiring until they're in their 70s. I know that's true for a number of lawyers, although I can tell you in England, particularly in London, most lawyers retire at the age of sort of 55. They think, hey, 30 years is more than enough work, and then they want to spend down whatever savings or retirement plans or anything else that they have. So conceptually, the case that you have, why don't you describe generically the case that you have, because it's an example, or maybe before you do that, tell us what a Roth conversion is, because that's different than anything we've talked about up to now, right?
Right. And before we do that, there's one other common situation where a Roth is a good thing, where it is advisable, and that is to a property owner who owns rental property. And oftentimes rental property loses money. And there's many reasons for that, one of which is what's called a depreciation shield. And the depreciation shield is a non-cash expense, the depreciation of the property and the grounds and other depreciable structures. And this can cause a rental property owner to have positive cash flow, but a tax loss.
Right.
And if there's a tax loss, then they may want to find income somewhere to offset that loss tax-free. And so if you have many rental properties and a total $100,000 loss, well, you can take $100,000 of cash potentially, and well, you can't exactly put the cash into your Roth IRA. You need to have earned income to put the cash into the Roth IRA. But if you had that, there's things that can be done. So that rental property owner is in a situation where they may want to make a Roth contribution.
Right, because you're saying they just may be in a low enough tax rate with respect to their earned income that it works to set aside that money into the Roth.
One other situation is somebody who's having a very bad year. And so their income is low or negative, and they are in a low tax bracket. And therefore, they want to be making a Roth contribution, because although it gets taxed now, their tax bracket is 0 or 10% or another low number. And so they'd rather be taxed on the income now at this low tax rate rather than be taxed at a higher tax rate in the future.
Right. So what is a Roth conversion? What is that all about?
So a Roth conversion is when you have a traditional retirement plan and it's significant, but you have a bad year. And in this bad year, you want to accelerate the taxes, to take the taxes that would eventually come due at retirement when you distribute the money, recognize the taxable income today because you're in a zero or low, very low tax bracket. And so you were allowed to take to decide how much you want to convert and to move that money from the traditional retirement plan into a Roth retirement plan and recognize tax now at your current tax rate.
And you're actually converting, do you sell the stocks that are in the traditional, or you just move the stocks into the Roth? Do you actually have to sell the securities?
Now, you do not necessarily have to sell the assets, but often the assets do get sold. But in any case, the conversion would be recognized at the fair market value of whatever assets, be it cash or non-cash.
Right. So if someone had a Roth with like $100,000 worth of fair market value securities and a traditional IRA, 100,000, and they wanted to convert into a Roth, they would typically be doing some list of pros and cons about, is it the right time? Should I do it? What are the tax consequences and so on? Because it's a complicated weighing of pros and cons, isn't it? And then age and expected lifespan and expected health span, and maybe even expected work span plays a role, right?
Indeed.
So tell us hypothetically and generically, without mentioning the wealth advisor, anyone by name, what happened in the case of the client that you have, without mentioning.
Okay. Before we go there, I want to say that we've mentioned the situations where a Roth might be advisable, but in just about every other case, a Roth is not advised. And we should get that out of the way before diving into the specific case. In almost every situation where a person actually has W-2 wage income, they are in a 35% federal tax bracket, and here in California, perhaps a 12% California tax bracket. So you're looking at a 47% or higher combined tax bracket, and 4% for the net tax, the net investment income tax, and there's a few other taxes as well. So the government is taking half, and this is by no means a good time to accelerate taxable income.
You're saying put the money into a traditional IRA where you get the deduction, right?
Exactly. Pay the tax later or never. Do not pay it now. So that's the goal of tax planning for almost everybody, except for these child movie stars. You want to delay, and die. And then nobody ever pays taxes on that gain or that income. So and that's a goal of tax planning, is to defer taxes, not to accelerate taxes.
And accelerate deductions.
Right. To delay taxes and accelerate deductions. That's a goal of tax planning. And a Roth does the exact opposite. It accelerates taxes. So right. Almost nobody wants to use a Roth. A Roth should only be entered with extreme caution and after consulting a tax advisor, not a financial person who's motivated to sell you something, but a tax advisor who's right. paid only by you and has no conflict of interest, and is going to give you the best advice for your situation.
Right.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.